They uncovered a mass grave in the Carolinas. Please, lock your doors. First off, I need to state that I'm a man whose faith is that of science. I believe in germ theory and general relativity. The supernatural is not my ballgame. Never has been. I am skeptical of all things people think can't be explained with science. I grew up with a Bible-thumping father and no mother, because apparently sepsis is all part of God's plan. My mother died at home with a fever of more than 105 Fahrenheit. My dad didn't believe in theories. Not medicine or Cro-Magnon man. There was just God and his plan. Although I'd like to think my father had no influence on my life, I suppose all this led me to where I am now. I'm the head of the anthropology department at a large southern university. My work, my life, it's all rock dust and carbon dating. Tables laid with tangible bones far older than 5,000 years with computer data to prove it. My father said such things were put in the dirt by the devil. Fossil record was but a test of faith. I hate that man, but now I'm wondering if somehow, like a broken clock being right twice a day, that the bastard was right. Anthropologists aren't usually the recipients of late-night business calls. So when my work cell rang at 11 p.m., I figured I'd either been butt dialed or it was another spam call about a vehicle warranty. I answered all the same. Hello, this is Professor Hinckley. Professor, this is Deputy Nick Caper. I'm with the Oconee County Sheriff's Office. I'm sorry to bother you at this hour, sir. You were recommended to me by the folks at Clemson. I didn't specialize in forensic anthropology, but I'd done work for the state before when human remains of native peoples were found. I must admit, calls like this made me feel important. I puffed out my chest and tried to shake the sleep out of my voice. Hi, yes, how may I help you, young man? Young man. I cringed. I wasn't even 50. Who was I trying to be? Sir, we're trying to stay ahead of the press on this, so your discretion would be greatly appreciated. We got a call this afternoon. Someone's dog wandered off on a walk in Sumter and came back with a femur in his mouth. Oh, boy. Yeah, well, the owner went looking to see where he fetched it from and found some human remains. They're old, so we're not talking about murder or at least any kind of active investigation, but the thing is, there's a lot of A lot of bones? Yes, sir. Dozens. As in dozens of bodies. Problem is it doesn't seem to be a burial ground. The dead folks, well, they're wearing Western-style clothes. Shirts and trousers and such. We did some research and read that mass graves of bodies all piled on each other like this would be peculiar. It would, I said as I pinched my nose. I take it you need someone to come out and take a look? We'd be very grateful. You can bring whoever you like. We just need this identified before our little town gets overrun by the media types filling the bars. I'm sorry, the county isn't familiar. Where did you say you were? Oh, don't worry, that's just how we like it here. We're in western South Carolina. Sumner National Forest. I'll email you all the details. Okay, I sighed. Okay, I can get there tomorrow, but it'll be somewhat later. 5 p.m. or so. I'll bring my team with me. My team? I cringed again. It was a fancy term for a couple of broke graduate students. Well, I'll tell the sheriff. Thank you, Professor. Apologies again about the hour. Don't worry about it. By now. I hung up and Googled Sumner National Forest. That part of the park in Oconee County was isolated. I clicked my thumbnail in my teeth. Western-style clothing. I figured it could be the mass grave from an old epidemic that hit some settlers. Everything about this felt strange. From the phone call to the circumstances. Who at Clemson would recommend me? It was Friday and I hoped my team, Meredith and Casey, weren't going to be too hungover to work as I went back to bed. The three of us carpooled and hit the road around 3 p.m. It was a later start than I'd have liked, but we would be at address the deputies sent me around 6 p.m. As it turned out, the address that was sent to me was more of a crude waypoint. The bodies were found nearly 400 feet from a trail, and I had thought we were lost until I saw a trailhead parking lot with a few law enforcement vehicles in it. We got out and stretched our legs. We had several large bags of excavation equipment and hauling them off trail would be a hell of a workout. I was beginning to regret even saying yes to this. Still, the circumstances were intriguing. This grave could be the site of some previously unknown event in early American history. I tried to tell myself that I should be excited. You should quit acting like such an old man. I met with the sheriff, deputy caper, and a few county clerks that were simply curious. The hiking wasn't as strenuous as I thought it'd be. It was entirely flat, but the bramble we had to wade through had strewn my skin with scrapes. I was actually blinking away a little blood by the time we got there. The dig site itself was clear. All the bushes and even small trees had all been sawn away, leaving an open patch of land about the size of a two-car garage. The ground was slightly dug up, a ring of earth lay around the mass grave. I immediately noticed something was off. The bones that were visible were blackened, as if they were burnt. Their clothing had curled from flames, and what little of the cotton was left was bunched and dirty. Still, I could tell the clothing was certainly not native. I looked at Deputy Caper with my mouth slightly agape. These bodies have been burnt. He turned to the sheriff. I told you, Sheriff. Ain't no way dirt and time does that to skeletons. The sheriff huffed. You're no archaeologist, Nick. So, what do you think this was? The sheriff looked at me expectantly as if I should already know the answers. Some kind of sickness or massacre. I have no idea. How old are they, do you think? I glared at him and repeated myself. I have no idea. Old. Like the 1700s? I nodded. Well, that's certainly past the statute of limitations. Hell, South Carolina might not have been a state and Oconee County wasn't even a twinkle in this country's eye. Not much we can do here, is there? I wanted this buffoon gone, so I nodded again. We'll work until it gets dark and get an early start tomorrow. We'll update you as soon as we learn anything. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you reached out to someone with the South Carolina Historical Society. I can date these bones, but I won't be able to tell you what these people were doing here. The sheriff hiked up his utility belt. We actually tried. They didn't answer when we called Friday night. We left a message, but we expect we'll hear back Monday. We also contacted a couple other universities, but no one wanted to come out on the weekend, it seems. Meredith and Casey looked at me peeved as they hadn't exactly wanted to come either, but I suggested it might help their grade. I stood straight and cleared my throat. I didn't think I was a chump for giving up my weekend to investigate a find of this importance. I thought it was Southern society's fault and not mine for being more interested in barbecues than mass burials. Well, they're missing out. This is certainly something extraordinary. Nothing we need to be concerned about though, right? The two cops seemed listless. They wanted to be dismissed. I sighed, almost disappointed. No, probably not. Okay, well, we're off then. The wife's been looking after the brisket today, so the sheriff crossed his fingers. Fingers crossed. The deputy unfurled a length of crime scene tape and started wrapping it around trees as they walked back. So you can find your way to the trail, he nodded at the tape. It gets awfully dark out here. Thank you. The deputy suddenly frowned. And Professor, are you staying at the Days Inn in Valhalla? No, we're not staying in Valhalla. We found a little bed and breakfast in Pleasant Falls. Just 10 or so minutes from here. The sheriff laughed and shook his head while the deputy's eyes widened. Pleasant Falls? There's a B&B there? Yeah, I was feeling defensive at this point. It's cheap as all hell. I bet. Just so you know, the folks are a bit cookie there. Cookie how? Blurted out Meredith. Well, rumor has it everybody in that town's got the same great-grandparents. If you catch my drift. There's all but 23 of them, too. Pleasant Falls ain't a town, it's a hamlet. We're just sleeping there. It's better to stay closer to the work site. Makes early mornings all the easier. It's not like we're going to the bar there. Alright, just thought we'd give you the heads up. The Days Inn in town always has vacancies, so if you do change your mind, just drive right over. I nodded. Thank you, gentlemen. They disappeared into the woods and we began unpacking some of our equipment. In the darkening woods it took us far longer to get set up than I'd anticipated. I realized these were likely the newest bones I'd ever dealt with professionally. I was used to brown and yellowed skulls. Fragmented remains where I'd pieced the bones of ancient peoples back together like a puzzle. I was out of my depth here. I was certain then, as interesting as it was, that I shouldn't have agreed to come. I squinted and moved parts of a skeleton as if I knew what I was doing. The remains appear to be early Anglo-settlers, I said that, but I only reached that conclusion contextually. There was nothing in the single skull I looked at to be sure. I would need time, daylight and finally some lab work to figure this out. I had Meredith and Casey pack up the valuable things that we wouldn't leave overnight and soon we were back in the car driving to our bed and breakfast. The town was nestled at the end of a dirt road. A dead-end sign sat shut, pocked with bullet holes at the entrance. Said Meredith when we saw it. It's fine, I said, trying to contain some anger. We're just sleeping here. Kids shoot everything everywhere out here. It's not damnatory of the entire town. Damnatory. For the third time in 24 hours, I scrunched my eyes and cringed. At least I was smart enough to know that actually smart people don't like using big words. Well, damnatory or not, said Casey. This place is a shithole. As if on cue, a pack of pigs darted across the dirt road and disappeared behind a derelict chapel. Its white paint was peeling, its steeple slightly bent. Well, if you're looking for the Ritz-Carlton, you picked the wrong major. I pulled angrily into the dirt driveway of the B&B. The house didn't look horrible. The paint was fresher than most of the other buildings, and the nice sign they had in front looked like someone put labor into making it a presentable business. We got out of the car and all wheeled around. The town was deserted. Even though the population was only a couple dozen, it was still disturbing. A curious flock of chickens bobbed across the grass towards us. I vote days in. Even semen-stained sheets beat this, said Meredith. I was about to give her an earful before she spoke again. Look at that freak show, she whispered. I followed her gaze to see a man walking toward us from behind the chapel. Hello. He waved strangely. The boots he wore were unlaced and he had a bowl cut. We all looked at each other before returning a wave. He came right up to us and paused. Hi, there, I said. We booked a room for the night. Do you work here? Oh no. He shook his head. I see. It was difficult to look him in the eye when he spoke. His teeth took my attention like a train wreck. Hard to look away. They were horribly crooked and the color of butter. You're here for that grave, aren't ye? He asked. I had to unfurrow my brow to be polite. The man's accent was strange. I couldn't place it at all, and I had to think after he spoke to figure out what he'd said. The grave? Yes. I wasn't aware it was public information. Meredith and Casey were uncomfortable and had both slyly stepped further away from the man. There are no secrets in these parts. He smiled, and again I was entranced by those teeth. But I knew there was a grave out there long before yous all dug it up. It's a legend here. I wanted this hillbilly to leave us alone, but now I was more intrigued. I stepped towards him. How's that? He sighed as if pleased he got to tell his story. This place had a name that's been long forgotten. Far Wales. That's what the settlers called it when they first came here all those hundreds of years ago. Thing is, they weren't alone in these woods. There were others living here. Spurts, demons, you pick a name, but they weren't human. They looked it though. Skinwalkers of some sort. The man paused and seemed to wipe a grin off his face. Anyhow, instead of leaving here when they found they weren't here first, the people did what those new countrymen did best. They invited them all to a dinner in a shack, locked the doors and burnt the place to the ground. They buried their remains somewhere out in the woods. Well, it looks like your town's folklore is somewhat accurate. Oh, I know. But that's not the interesting part. The legend went on to say that one of them didn't die right away. He lived, At least long enough to talk to his killers. What did he say? Meredith and Casey were now leaning forward to listen. He said that if their bones were ever to see the light of day, his people would grow flesh like trees do leaves. And that they'd rise up from the dirt and slaughter those townsmen. Slaughter everyone. Every last settler of this new world. I saw a couple of women in the window of the church. They laughed when I caught their eye and ducked beneath the sill. My cheeks flushed and I exhaled like a bull. I'm not interested in that kind of nonsense. Flesh does not photosynthesize. Skin, hair, a consciousness, these things are created by cells and... That's all good. The man held up his hands to stop me. I was just telling you a story. No need to get all specific. Right, I said. Meredith gave me a little eye roll as if to say asshole. Just be warned. The sun was shining awful bright today, he smiled. And the day before, too. I opened my mouth, but Meredith cut me off. We appreciate the heads up. We really do. I thought you might. He bowed his head and sauntered off. Good day now. Good day, said Casey somewhat sarcastically. When the man was out of earshot, I whipped around. You two are okay playing along with that nonsense? If it means not being murdered in my sleep, said Casey. And after that spiel and what the cops thought of this place. You can stay here, but I'm staying in Valhalla. Holla, said Meredith in agreement. Okay, fine, I was fuming but trying to keep my cool. Trying not to be the twice-divorced grump I was inevitably becoming. But if you're taking my car, you'll be back at the crack of dawn to take me to the site. Done. We'll fill her up for you, too. I should have left with them. Although the doors to the Band B were unlocked, there was no one there. I rang the little bell, but no one came to greet me. Too proud to call them back for a ride, I took one of the second-floor rooms, and barricaded the door shut behind me. I slept fine, surprisingly. Although I didn't want to admit it, that ghost town and the bowl-cut man's rantings made me feel like a scared child. The only problem is that when I woke at sunrise, Meredith and Casey weren't there. I stepped onto the front porch of the bed and breakfast. The town was as empty as the evening before. Just some stray animals here and there. The same chickens and a skeptical border collie inspecting me from a distance. I pulled out my phone and called Meredith and then Casey. No answer. The sun got higher and dawn was long gone as I began walking down the road. I passed the trailhead parking lot and stared at where the trail began. It was as if there were a door into the forest. A patch of empty space in the otherwise impenetrable wall of woods. And that door was waving to me. The wind was blowing hard now. The leaves and branches swaying to and fro, entrancing. I stopped walking. Somehow, I'd hardly noticed it, my car was in the parking lot. I was fuming. Did they really not even bother driving the extra 5 minutes to pick me up? I rushed towards the trail in a huff and charged through the brush to the burial site. By the time I got there, my skin was scratched up horribly and I was panting. I was confused but thankful that the gravesite was empty. Meredith and Casey would have seen me in that sorry state and pitted me as some pathetic old man. I stood with my hands on my hips and narrowed my eyes at the bodies. Meredith and Casey were probably just sleeping off a hangover in Valhalla. We'd left the tarp, some did brushes, and I had a pair of latex gloves in my pocket. I could get to work. I knelt and began digging through the bodies. Unlike many older specimens I'd worked with, the bones weren't flaky or fragile and falling apart in my hands. I lifted and moved a rib cage. Under it was a piece of burned navy cotton. I began unraveling it carefully. You can imagine my confusion when I saw it was a modern design. A crew collar. It even had a tag. It was a sweater from Gap. I tossed it aside and started picking through the bones in a panic. This one still had flesh on it. Not yet decomposed. Another was still warm. I pictured the empty town of Pleasant Falls. A ghost town that was supposed to have 24 residents. How many bodies were in this grave? Close to 24, I thought. I looked further out into the grave and started counting skulls. But I paused a moment later and stood. There was blood. Fresh blood on top of the grave. It was still dripping from the sky. I slowly looked up. Hung in the trees were the flayed bodies of Meredith and Casey. They were naked. Their mouths red ovals like they'd died screaming. What happened then was a blur. I ran back through the woods, the whole time thinking about the man with the bowl cut we'd seen in town. The man that seemed like he was pulled from the 1600s. He was playing with us the whole time. The legend he had told had already come true. The words rang in my head. The sun was shining awfully bright today. And the day before. His bones were the ones originally buried there. His people. Demons or skinwalkers. They murdered the entire town of Pleasant Falls and stuffed them in the very grave they had been buried in. I think they let me live so I could tell you. So, I could try to warn you. They're going to kill everyone on this continent. I know they are. And they're coming.